I was walking home with my sister when she pointed out in the distance. I looked over and I saw a cat there. And not just any cat. I've seen that cat before, with its grey and white fur. It was the cutest little creature that I've seen. And the cat was just lying on the ground, menacingly. It saw us and walked over. And luckily, this time I was ready. I passed a small packet of cat food to my sister, and she started feeding the cat. As I was watching the cat nibble on the tuna, I started to remember the last time when I saw this cat, when I did not have anything to feed it. There was this feeling of regret for not being prepared for stray cat encounters, and also a subtle regret for not being ready for what life throws at me. But at least it went well this time. And afterwards, we stayed around with the cat to see it do its shenanigans. So, what's the point I'm trying to get across? Other than the fact that you should have cat food ready for any stray cats that you encounter. The lesson here is to be prepared for unexpected events. And for most of us, learning is indeed an unexpected event. I'm sure there are times where you were in a lecture, listening with your full focus, and yet nothing seems to make any sense. There's this sense of confusion and nothing seems to click. As a result, you don't remember much from the lesson. And when it's a week before the exams, you have to cram 22 chapters of content all over again. Think of it this way. If you do preparation work for a whole topic before the lectures, have a big picture understanding of the entire topic, and be ready to take in the details when the lectures occur, we wouldn't need to keep rewatching lectures and rereading notes. And this preparation work is called pre-study. Pre-study is like the briefing before a spy mission, learning the general layout of the target area that you want to infiltrate. I mean, sure, you're still going to face roadblocks, but having a game plan ready when problems arise is always a good idea. Going into class without pre-study is like having puzzle pieces scattered around, but having no clue what the end product is even supposed to look like. You spend the first few minutes trying to figure out the picture that it's supposed to make, and yet it doesn't seem to make any sense, and after a while, you just give up and take a nap. But with pre-study, you have a big picture understanding of what is going on, and therefore you will have a rough idea of what type of information you are going to receive during the lectures, and where that information would belong. You can guess how each puzzle piece, or basically each piece of information, fits into the big picture. And so, when it's lecture time and you're bombarded with details and information, you can see how the information relates to prior knowledge or the big picture, and thus your brain sees the relevance in the information and retains it. Knowing the importance of pre-study, the next step will be knowing how to do the pre-study. And do take note, pre-study should be done on a topic-wide scale instead of doing lecture by lecture. So for example, if you have 5 lectures on photosynthesis and respiration, then you would do the pre-study for all 5 lectures in the weekend before the first lecture starts. So the first thing you want to do is just browse through your resources. Gather a bunch of keywords that you think are important to the topic, whether they are words from headings, subheadings, bolded words, or diagram labels. If you deem them important, just write them down. If you find new important words at any point in time during your study sessions, feel free to add them. This also means that you do not need to spend 2 hours just to find every single relevant keyword. Spend about 20 minutes to get 80% of the keywords, and just add on along the way. As you skim through the resources, or look through the notes, try to identify 3 to 4 main ideas of the topic. If there seems to be more than 4 main ideas, see if you can group them based on similarities, or perhaps some of them may be about similar ideas, in which case you can hypothesize putting them into one group or one chunk, and that becomes one main idea. You can hypothesize how these main ideas may be related to each other. The next step will be to connect the remaining keywords to the main ideas and try to form a big relational picture. It's okay for these main ideas or chunks to be wrong, as you can fix that later on when you research or learn more about the topic. Another way to think about this is like trying to identify the common theme of the keywords. For example, are they all part of a certain system and just describing the functions of the system or the importance of that system? Just like how cellular transport is just about how the fluid mosaic model works and the many different functions that it serves. Or are these keywords explaining a process and its end products, which are linked to other processes, just like how photosynthesis leads to respiration and vice versa? If this helps you to identify the main ideas and how they can be linked together, try representing this relationship using a mini mind map, or try using visuals to represent certain concepts. Maybe just represent this information in a way that makes the most sense to you. Pre-study may take quite some time, especially if it's a big topic. But by the end of it, you should have a big picture understanding, sort of an overview of the entire topic without the details. And since you don't have much of the details, you should feel that you're more curious about the topic. Now, you probably have questions, you're hungry for the details, and when it is class time, you're not as confused about what is going on. You see the information you learn as relevant as you can see how it fits into the big picture. And as a result, you retain the information more. When I was 14, I went on an overseas trip to China with my classmates. And at that time, I despise taking photos. Maybe it's because I have shaky hands. But it's more likely because of the fact that I hated it. When I look at these photos in the future, I will remember the embarrassing times of the trip. Like the time where I locked myself and my roommate outside the hotel room because we both left the entry card inside. Or the time where I wanted to borrow a game console charger from my friend and I knocked on the wrong hotel door, only to realize that I may or may not have interrupted a couple's evening. Or the time where me and my classmate got lost in the museum because we wandered off from the whole class and decided that we were going to be Dora the Explorer for the day. The thing is, these photos are a reminder of the memories in the past, the stories that have unfolded, or used to share ideas that transcend what words can comprehend. After all, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And it is the same when we take notes. The notes serve as a storage of information for future reference. But there's a difference. Notes are also supposed to induce various levels of deeper processing and knowledge encoding. We are often told to write copious amounts of notes during lesson time, and it pisses me off when we are praised for being good human transcribers, but frowned upon when we actually use our brain cells before writing stuff down. To see why this is an absurd way of writing notes, let's try to visualize the processes to help turn sensory information, which is basically the lectures, into long-term memory. Step 1. You take in and comprehend the lecture material. Step 2. You identify the key points. Step 3. You try to link the material to prior knowledge and prior notes, or maybe your pre-study essentially. Step 4. You paraphrase, summarize, and try to represent the information in a different way. And this is how you get written notes that actually help facilitate the processing of information. Now, let's look at the process when you decide to turn off your brain and just spam what the teacher says verbatim. Step 1. You take in the lecture material. Step 2. You write it down. And step 3. You forget the content and start reanalyzing your life choices. So how do you prevent yourself from falling into this rabbit hole of useless notes? Firstly, we want to engage our brain more by writing our notes freehand instead of typing it. Typing notes makes it faster and easier to write word for word, which is exactly the way to speedrun not learning anything. Using freehand also allows you to use spatial arrangement and arrows to represent certain concepts that link to each other. Secondly, we want to spend time thinking before we write anything down. So listen to a section of the lecture, stop, think, then write. This way, you are forcing yourself to actually process the information. Thirdly, we want to represent the notes in a way that makes the most sense to us. Imagine yourself revising your notes, opening up your notebook, only to see paragraph after paragraph of words. I'm sure it will be easier to understand rocket science than your notes. And when we cannot understand our notes, what do we all do? Just memorize, regurgitate the information, and then forget all about it. Having notes that make sense would actually save you time in revision. Imagine your new notes, where you can represent the information in a mini mind map, where there are visuals representing certain chunks of words or concepts, and so you can just glance through in a second and get a good idea of what the notes are talking about. Maybe put in certain analogies to represent certain specific processes, to remind yourself of how these processes work. Basically, you're trying to make your life easier in the long run. And if you're really paranoid and still want to copy down what the teacher says, word for word, then do collecting and processing instead. Whenever you're going to write notes, split your page into half. The left column would be collecting, which is basically the notes that you will copy down word for word. The right column would be processing. Processing would essentially be everything that I mentioned earlier, which is taking certain concepts or chunks of words and trying to paraphrase it to the simplest form to your best capacity, or maybe use some visuals to represent these concepts. And use arrows, spatial arrangement, when you see certain concepts that relate to one another, using analogies to link the information to prior knowledge. And by doing this, you'll feel a strain in your brain, as it is actively trying to frame the information in a way that best suits your understanding. And that is where the learning takes place. I suck at chemistry. Whenever I open up a practice paper, I try to find questions that I know I can do. You know the advice to do questions that you know how to do first? Yeah, it's a great idea, unless you're like me. And when you flip through the whole paper, you realize that you are screwed. It didn't help that the national exams were a month away. And it also didn't help that I had single-digit grades for every chemistry paper. But fortunately for me, I had a schoolmate that was an absolute genius at chemistry. When he saw me having a mental breakdown looking at the past year paper, he decided to teach me. Unfortunately, the disparity in skill level became apparent rather soon. To him, certain concepts seemed just intuitive, like saying the sky is blue and League of Legends players should touch more grass. But to me, it seemed like rocket science. I was curious, not about the past year paper, but by the difference in the mastery of knowledge. What was the difference? The content we learned is the same, the assignments are the same, but clearly, the way of thinking, the way of approaching learning is different. As he was explaining the rocket science to me, I noticed something. He was explaining how each concept was related to one another. He could see how each factor affected the other factors. He could explain the same concept in multiple ways as he saw my confusion rise. You could say that he was targeting the same topic or concept from multiple angles, and therefore he has a high mastery of knowledge for chemistry. Although I struggle with chemistry, I have a high level of mastery of knowledge for my favorite show, put my favorite character into any real-life scenario, and I could imagine what would happen. Put the character in an imaginary scenario, add a few different variables, and it would still be intuitive. I'm not a psychopath, so I clearly did not do practice papers to learn about my favorite character. I also didn't do any flashcards or reread the same chapter over and over again. Which is funny, because I spent a lot of time learning subjects like biology, by memorizing the learning outcomes, doing past year papers, being roasted by my teachers for not knowing every little detail, in the whole process of how natural selection leads to evolution. There's an assumption here that you don't have the same level of mastery in the subjects that you are tested compared to the things that you like. It seems impossible to add a few variables into our practice paper questions and still have any clue how to answer them. However, when you add variables into your favorite show or game, it seems to make sense. I think it's clear that we should spend our studying time more wisely by integrating the way we take in and use information for the things we like into the subjects where we are actually tested on. So that leads to spaced interleave retrieval. Interleaving is basically looking at the same piece of information from different angles. It's like in basketball, where instead of practicing your free throws from one spot, you practice it from different angles. Maybe a step to the left, at the 2-point line, or the 3-point line. We are looking at the content we want to learn from different angles and perspectives. Let's say, after your pre-study, and you're collecting and processing that you did during your lectures or right after the lectures. At the end of the day, you will do same-day interleave retrieval by doing a brain dump, which is essentially spamming everything you know about the newly learned topic, either in a page, top to bottom, linearly, line by line, or by representing what you remember through a mind map, showing the relationships between different concepts. After 3 days, you will do another session to refresh your memory by teaching what you have learned to an imaginary student. Teach it as if you had a time machine to go back and teach yourself again. And knowing that you had zero knowledge about the topic, knowing what prior knowledge you actually know. How will you then explain the relationship between the concepts to make it easier to understand for your imaginary student? A week from now, you will do practice questions, preferably the extended method. Direct method is essentially what you have been doing the whole time. Doing the questions, checking the answers. Extended method is basically doing practice questions as you would normally do, but instead of checking the answers directly, you would read your notes and resources to learn the parts where you're unsure about. And after that, you would try to synthesize your own answer key. Check your answer key with the official answer key. At this point, your answer key should match it. And if the answer is still wrong, this is the best time to consult your teachers. This way, you will fix the gaps in your knowledge, as you will have automatically revised the sections that you are weaker at, but also avoiding the mistake of just checking the official answers and thinking that it's a silly mistake. And a week later, you can start doing your past year papers. Since your knowledge is now more stable, you can do it after 1 week, and then do it again after 2 weeks, or when there are exams coming soon. And in the meantime, if you find any details that don't seem to belong in your pre-study map, or are just very isolated details, slowly add them to flashcards along the way. If all these seem daunting, just try one method at a time. But do note that in the end, you will still need to use multiple interleaving methods to see the same content from different angles. And remember, the only way you can do it wrong is by not trying.